I don't know if this works for you, but do you not find there are certain words or phrases that have such strong associations that when you hear the word or the phrase, you immediately think of something else? So, for example, if I see or hear the number 1966, I think of the year my brother started at Gravesend Grammar School. No, I think of the World Cup, Bobby Moore, England winning something. Actually, never mind the football, what about the rugby? When I hear the phrase Christmas Eve, used to give me a lovely, warm, glowing feeling. But now it just fills me with terror. And I think, will I survive another Christmas? Will I see my children for Christmas lunch? And it works with names as well. If I say the name Jeremy Clarkson, you know what that means, don't you? Most of you. If I say James Bond, Boris Johnson, there's an image which goes with each name. Do you know, for a lot of people who live outside Sussex, if you say to people who live outside Sussex, if you say to them the word Eastbourne, do you know what they think of? They think it's a special town for retired people. But it's not true, is it? I was there yesterday, watching virile young people watching tennis at the tennis championships. But it's the association with the word. And there's a word in that very first verse of Joshua chapter 2 that is full of meaning for God's people. It's a word that would have set alarm bells ringing. And the word in Joshua chapter 2 verse 1 is spies. God's people, Israel, are on the edge of Canaan. They are on the edge of the land that God had promised to give them. But they've been here before. 40 years earlier, they had stood at almost exactly the same place on the threshold of the promised land. It was God's gift to them. It was a present. All they had to do was accept it. All they had to do was take possession of it. 40 years earlier, they sent spies into land to check it out. And 10 of the 12 spies came back, and they gave such an unfavourable report about the land that God's people refused to take the gift. They refused to go in. 40 years earlier, only 2 of the spies had said, "Come on, this is the land that God has promised to give us. He's going to be with us. Let's go." And one of those 2 spies was Joshua. Joshua is the same name as Jesus. They both mean God saves. And now, 40 years on, Joshua is in charge. He is the captain. And they're back where they were before. The last time the spies were sent out, it was a complete disaster. And it doesn't get off to a great start this time either, if you look down. I'd love you to follow as I read from verse 1, okay? If you could just follow as I read. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. He said, "Go look over the land, especially Jericho. Especially the city of Jericho." So the spies went to Jericho and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab. I don't know what you think, but it's not a great start, is it? They are on a really dangerous, important mission. They are in hostile territory, but what do they want? A prostitute. It looks as though these spies are going to lead the people astray again. But can I just show you, it gets even worse, because these 2 spies are absolutely rubbish. They're the worst spies imaginable. They are more like Johnny English than Jason Bourne. Because did you notice, everybody knows where they are. They're meant to be spies, but the king of Jericho knows exactly where they are. They're in the house of Rahab the prostitute. And we know why they're in the house of Rahab the prostitute. So he sends word to Rahab and he says, "Bring out the men who came to you. Hand them over because they are spies." But Rahab has hidden them. She's hidden them, and then she tells this massive and presumably very dangerous lie. She says, they were here, but then they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. Now, why in the world does Rahab do that? Why does she hide them? Why does she tell this enormous lie? She owed the spies nothing. She is a Canaanite from Jericho, so she's betraying her own people to save the enemy. She's lying to the king. She must be putting herself in danger. Why would you do all of that? Why would you do it? Well, let me tell you why. It's because Rahab sees something that absolutely no one else in Jericho can see. Just look at the second reading with me. You need to flick on. Second reading, verse 8. She goes up on the roof and she speaks to the spies and she says, I know that the Lord has given you this land and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord destroyed the Egyptians when he took you up out of the land of Egypt. We have heard how he destroyed the kings of the Amorites when they tried to oppose you. And when we heard it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Do you see what's happening? The whole of Jericho is melting with fear. And it is not misplaced, because through Joshua, God's judgment has fallen. His judgment has fallen. But what on earth has this got to do with you and me? What's this got to do with us this morning? Well, let me read you a verse from Acts 17. Acts 17, verse 31, you know it. We've talked about this verse many times. The Apostle Paul is talking to people in the city of Athens in Greece, and he says to them, God has set a date when he will judge the world with justice through the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And Paul is saying God has done something really terrifying. He has raised Jesus from the dead. He has defeated death. He's raised Jesus as judge of all the world. There is no avoiding this man. He's not just a figure in history back then. He's alive, and he will judge with justice. For the people of Jericho, Joshua is coming. Joshua is coming. And for people today, Jesus is coming. Same God, same judgment, same perfect justice. It's terrifying. Jericho is melting with fear. Rahab is terrified too. But she sees what nobody else in Jericho can see. She sees something. She sees that we're not going to win. Can I say, this is so important. She sees that the only way to escape the judgment of God is to seek the mercy of God. That's what she sees. So verse 12, she's very fearful, but her fear is turning into faith. She says to the spies, she says to them, verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother and my brothers and sisters and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. God is coming. God is coming. The truth about him has been made clear. The whole of Jericho has heard what he has done for his people. And the whole of Jericho has heard what he has done to all those who set themselves up in opposition against him. His judgments are terrifying. And I know that we find the idea of God's judgment hard. I know we find it really, really hard. So I want to say to you this morning, please, please hear this. God's judgment is hard, it is terrifying. But you have got to see at the same time the boundless nature of his grace and his mercy. You have got to see the vastness of his grace and his mercy. On the cross of Jesus, the judgment falls. The judgment falls. But it need never fall on you or me or anyone we love. It need not fall. The story of Rahab is here to show us that even the most no-hoper, the most godless, prostitute, enemy, pagan of God, the vilest offender who asks for mercy will receive it. They will. They will. Can I maybe give you this little story as a bit of an illustration of how it works? In 1861, who was around then? No. In 1861, Robert E. Lee was the most famous general in America. And when the American Civil War broke out, he was so well regarded that he was actually offered command of the United States Army, the whole army. But he chose to side with his home state, Virginia, the most northern of the Confederacy states, and therefore he set himself up as a rebel against the sovereign, elected, rightful government of America. He became a rebel in the bloodiest war America has ever known. Never mind World War II, never mind Vietnam, never mind any other war. The Civil War killed more Americans than any other war. So he set himself up as a rebel, but not just any rebel. He was such an effective general that he did more than any other individual to prolong the Civil War. But in the end, it didn't do any good. The Confederacy, the South, they were completely defeated. And General Lee surrendered. And obviously he deserved, didn't he? Surely he deserved the most severe punishment for what he'd done. But actually he was given a full pardon. And he was able to go back to his home in Virginia, and he was able to live the rest of his life in peace. Imagine, though, just imagine this. Imagine how extraordinary it would be if, as well as a pardon, he had been invited to come and live in the White House. Imagine that, as well as a pardon, he had been invited by the President of the USA, against whom he had been rebelling. He had been invited to come and live and eat at the President's table. Well, that would be extraordinary, wouldn't it? And yet, because Jesus died, that is what is possible for rebels against God. That is what is possible. We can be pardoned, but not just pardoned, we can be welcomed into God's family. Joshua, Jesus, same name. He will never turn away anyone who comes to him and asks for mercy. Rahab sees what everyone else in Jericho could see. She could see that God was coming, and it was terrifying, but she could see what no one else in Jericho could see. She sees that you cannot sit on the fence. You cannot sit on the fence. Joshua is coming. Jesus is coming, but he comes with mercy. She sees it. She sees what's going on, and she asks for it. And then lastly, she trusts and obeys. You know, it's a ridiculous thing. But Rahab the prostitute, she is actually the model for all of us to copy. Not the prostitution bit, but everything else. So just look on to the very end. Verses 17 and 18 of verses 17 and 18, right at the end. You've got to turn over again. Verses 17 and 18. The spies, they say to Rahab, they say, okay, but this is what you must do. This is what you must do. But you know, I always remember when one of our children was ill, very, very, very ill. I spoke to a consultant on the phone about it, and he listened and he said, Louis, this is what you must do. This is what you must do. And when someone says something like that to you in those circumstances, you listen. And this is what they say. They say, when Joshua's army arrives, you must have tied a scarlet cord in the window from which you let us down. And you and your family must take refuge under that scarlet cord. You must do this, and then you will be saved. And if you were to read on just a couple of verses, unfortunately we've missed it out, but a couple of verses on, that's what Rahab did. She didn't question what the spies said. There's no suggestion that she complained about it and said, but I don't have a piece of red cord, and anyway, red's not my colour. She just obeyed what they said. And this is so important because all through history, all through the Bible, God's rescue plan always involves the obedience of faith. So God says to Noah, he says, I have a plan to save you, but you've got to do what I tell you. You've got to build an ark, and then you've got to take refuge in it. God says to Israel when they are slaves in Egypt, he says, I've got a plan to save you, but you must take refuge under the blood of a lamb. He says to Rahab, I will save you, but you must take refuge under a scarlet cord. That is the sign that you are trusting me. And he says to you and me, the judgment is coming. The judgment is coming, he says, but I have a plan to save you. I will rescue, but you must take refuge under the blood of the Lamb. You must take refuge in Jesus. He is the flood, but he is also the ark. He is the instrument of God's judgment, but he is also the instrument of God's rescue. All we need to do is come. All we need to do is ask for mercy. All we need to do is turn from trusting in things that cannot deliver, like an army, like our good works, like anything, and trust his rescue plan. Imagine the lifeboat is there. The lifeboat has moored up alongside, and Jesus is beckoning you and me. All we've got to do is get in to the lifeboat. And if you were to look on to Joshua chapter 6, you'll see that God keeps his promise. Rahab the prostitute and all her family are saved by Joshua, and then they are welcomed into God's family forever. In fact, Rahab becomes the great-grandmother of Boaz. Do you remember Boaz when we looked at Ruth? Which means that Rahab, the shady lady of Jericho, is brought into the very bloodline of Jesus, so that no one can boast about their nationality and no one can boast about their ancestry. Jesus has a prostitute in his bloodline. So Rahab, she sees who the Lord is. She asks the Lord for mercy. She trusts him and obeys what he says. Hebrews 11 verse 31 tells us that Rahab is a model of faith for us. She is the model for us. And she's a great reminder that church is not a club for good people. Church is not a country club for respectable people. Do you remember Luke 15? We looked at it on Wednesday a couple of weeks ago. This man welcomes sinners. Church is not a club for the pious good. It's a refuge for sinners and prostitutes who can come and be transformed by God's grace. It's great news. Amen.